Joseph's three masters. As a rule, the only merchandise with which the Ishmaelites loaded their camels was pitch and the skins of beasts. By a providential dispensation, they carried bags of perfumery this time, instead of their usual ill-smelling freight, so that sweet fragrance might be wafted to Joseph on his journey to Egypt. These aromatic substances were well suited to Joseph, whose body emitted a pleasant smell, so agreeable and pervasive that the road along which he traveled was fragrant with it, and on his arrival in Egypt, the perfume from his body spread over the whole land, and the royal princesses, following the sweet scent to trace its source, reached the place where Joseph stood. Even after his death, the same fragrance was spread abroad by his bones, enabling Moses to distinguish Joseph's remains from all others, and thereby keep the oath of the children of Israel to bury them in the Holy Land. When Joseph learned that the Ishmaelites were carrying him to Egypt, he began to weep bitterly at the thought of being removed so far from Canaan and from his father. One of the Ishmaelites noticed Joseph's weeping and crying, and thinking that he found riding uncomfortable, he lifted him from the back of the camel and permitted him to walk on foot. But Joseph continued to weep and sob, crying incessantly, "Oh, Father, Father!" Another one of the caravan, tired of his lamentations, beat him, causing only the more tears and wails, until the youth, exhausted by his grief, was unable to move on. Now, all the Ishmaelites in the company dealt out blows to him. They treated him with relentless cruelty and tried to silence him with threats. God saw Joseph's distress, and he sent darkness and terror on the Ishmaelites, and their hands grew rigid when they raised them to inflict a blow. Astonished, they asked themselves why God did this to them on the road. They did not know that it was for the sake of Joseph. The journey continued until they came to Ephrath, the place of Rachel's sepulchre. Joseph hurried to his mother's grave, threw himself across it, and groaned and cried, saying, "O mother, mother, that did bear me, arise, come forth, and see how your son has been sold into slavery, with no one to take pity on him. Arise, see your son, and weep with me over my misfortune, and observe the heartlessness of my brothers. Awake, O mother, rouse yourself from your sleep. Rise up and prepare for the conflict with my brothers, who stripped me even of my shirt and sold me as a slave. And without mercy they tore me away from my father. Arise, accuse my brothers before God, and see who he will justify in judgment, and who he will find guilty. Arise, O mother, awake from your sleep. See how my father is with me in his soul and in his spirit, and comfort him, and ease his heavy heart." Joseph wept and cried at the grave of his mother, until, weary from grief, he lay immovable as stone. Then he heard a voice, heavy with tears, speak to him from the depths, saying, "My son, Joseph, my son, I hear your complaints and your groans. I see your tears, and I know your misery. I am grieved for your sake, and your affliction is added to the burden of my affliction. But my son, Joseph, put your trust in God, and wait on him. Fear not, for the Lord is with you, and he will deliver you from all evil. Go down into Egypt with your masters, and fear nothing, for the Lord is with you." This and much more like it did the voice utter, and then it was silent. Joseph listened in great amazement at first, and then he broke out in renewed tears. Angered about that, one of the Ishmaelites drove him from his mother's grave with kicks and curses. Then Joseph entreated his masters to take him back to his father, who would give them great riches as a reward. But they said, "Why, you are a slave. How can you even know where your father is? If you had a free man as a father, you would not have been sold twice for a petty sum." And then their fury against him increased, and they beat him and maltreated him, and he wept bitter tears. Now God looked on the distress of Joseph, and sent darkness to enshroud the land once more. A storm raged, the lightning flashed, and from the thunderbolts the whole earth trembled, and the Ishmaelites lost their way in terror. The beasts and camels stood still, and, beat them as their drivers might, they refused to budge from the spot, but crouched down on the ground. Then the Ishmaelites spoke to one another and said, "Why has God brought this on us? What are our sins? What are our trespasses, that this thing should befall us?" One of them said to the others, "Could it be that this has come on us by reason of the sin we committed against this slave? Let us beg him earnestly to grant us forgiveness, and if then God will take pity and let these storms pass away, we shall know that we suffered harm on account of the injury we inflicted on this slave." The Ishmaelites did according to these words, and they said to Joseph, "We have sinned against God and against you. Pray to your God and entreat him to take this death plague from us, for we acknowledge that we have sinned against him." Joseph fulfilled their wish, and God heard his petition. The storm was calmed. All around became calm. The beasts got back up off the ground, and the caravan could proceed on its way. Now the Ishmaelites saw plainly that all their trouble had come to them for the sake of Joseph, and they spoke to one another, saying, "We know now that all this evil has happened to us on account of this poor fellow. Should we bring death on ourselves by our own doings? Let us take counsel together what is to be done with the slave." One of them advised that Joseph's wish be fulfilled, and he be taken back to his father. Then they would be sure of receiving the money they had paid out for him. This plan was rejected, however, because they had gone a great way on their journey, and they were not inclined to go backwards. They therefore resolved on carrying Joseph to Egypt and selling him there. They would rid themselves of him in this way, and also receive a great price. They continued their journey as far as the borders of Egypt, and there they met 4 men, descendants of Medan, the sons of Abraham, and to these they sold Joseph for 5 shekels. The 2 companies, the Ishmaelites and the Medanites, arrived in Egypt on the same day. The Medanites, hearing that Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard, was seeking a good slave, and went to him at once to try to dispose of Joseph to him. Potiphar was willing to pay as much as 400 pieces of silver, for, high as the price was, it did not seem too great for a slave that pleased him as much as Joseph. However, he made a condition. He said to the Medanites, "I will pay you the price demanded, but you must bring me the person that sold the slave to you, that I may be in a position to find out all about him. For the youth seems to me to be neither a slave nor the son of a slave. He appears to be of noble blood. I must therefore convince myself he was not stolen." The Medanites brought the Ishmaelites to Potiphar, and they testified that Joseph was a slave, and they had owned him, and had sold him to the Medanites. Potiphar rested satisfied with this report, paid the price asked for Joseph, and the Medanites and the Ishmaelites went on their way. Joseph's coat brought to his father. No sooner was the sale of Joseph an accomplished fact than the sons of Jacob repented of their deed. They even went after the Midianites to ransom Joseph, but their efforts to overtake them were vain. They had to accept the inevitable. Meanwhile, Reuben had rejoined his brothers. He had been so deeply absorbed in penances and in praying and studying the Torah in expiation of his sin against his father that he had not been able to remain with his brothers and tend the flocks, and thus it happened that he was not on the spot when Joseph was sold. His first errand was to go to the pit in hope of finding Joseph there. In that case, he would have carried him off and restored him to his father secretly, without the knowledge of his brothers. He stood at the opening and called again and again, "Joseph! Joseph!" But as he received no answer, he concluded that Joseph had perished, either by reason of terror or as a result of a snake bite. So he descended into the pit, only to find he was not there, either living or dead. He mounted to the top again and tore his clothes and cried out, "The lad is not there, and what answer shall I give my father if he is dead?" Then Reuben returned to his brothers and told them that Joseph had vanished from the pit. He was deeply grieved, because he, being the oldest of the sons, was responsible to their father Jacob. The brothers made a clean breast of what they had done with Joseph, and they related to him that they had tried to make good their evil deed, and how their efforts had been in vain. Now there remained nothing to do but invent a plausible explanation for their brother's disappearance to give to Jacob. First of all, however, they took an oath not to betray to their father or any other human being what they had actually done. If anyone violated that oath, he would be put to death by the sword. Then they took counsel together about what to say to Jacob. It was Issachar's advice to tear Joseph's coat of many colors and dip it in the blood of a kid of the goats, to make Jacob believe his son had been torn by a wild beast. The reason he suggested a kid was because its blood looks like human blood. In expiation for this act of deception, it was ordained that a kid be used as an atonement sacrifice when the tabernacle was dedicated. Simon opposed this suggestion. He did not want to relinquish Joseph's coat, and he threatened to strike down anyone who should attempt to wrest it from him by force. The reason for his vehemence was that he was very much enraged against his brother for having not killed Joseph. But they threatened him in turn, saying, "If you will not give up the coat, we shall say you executed the evil deed yourself." At that Simon surrendered it, and Naphtali brought it to Jacob, handing it to him with the words, "When we were driving our herds homeward, we found this garment covered with blood and dust on the highway, a little beyond Shechem. Is this your son's coat?" Jacob recognized Joseph's coat, and overwhelmed by grief, he fell prostrate, and long lay on the ground, motionless, like a stone. Then he arose and set up a loud cry, and wept, saying, "It is my son's coat." In great haste, Jacob dispatched a slave to his sons to bid them to come to him, that he might learn more about what had happened. In the evening they all came, their garments rent and dust strewn on their heads. When they confirmed all that Naphtali had told him, Jacob broke out in mourning and lamentation. "It is my son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is without a doubt torn in pieces. I sent him to you to find out whether it was well with you, and well with the flock. He went to do my errand, and while I thought him to be with you, the misfortune befell." Then the sons of Jacob replied, "He came not to us at all. Since he left you, we have not set eyes on him." At these words, Jacob could doubt no longer that Joseph had been torn by wild beasts, and he mourned for his son, saying, "O my son Joseph, my son, it is my fault this chance has come to you. I am distressed. I am sorely distressed. How sweet was your life to me, and how bitter is your death. Would to God that I had died for you, O Joseph, for now I am distressed. Joseph, where are you, and where is your soul? Arise, arise from your place, and look at my grief. Come and count the tears that roll down my cheeks, and bring the total of them before God, that his wrath be turned away from me. O my son, how painful and appalling was your death! None has died a death like yours since the beginning. I know well it came to pass by reason of my sins. Oh, that you would return and see the bitter sorrow your misfortune has brought on me. But it is true, it was not I that created you and formed you. I gave you neither spirit nor soul, but God created you. He formed your bones, covered them with flesh, breathed the breath of life into your nostrils, and then gave you to me. And God, who gave you to me, he has taken you away from me, and from him has this dispensation come. What the Lord does is well done." In these words and many others like them, Jacob mourned and bewailed his son. When the sons of Jacob saw the vehemence of their father's grief, they repented of their deed and wept bitterly. Especially Judah was grief-stricken. He laid his father's head on his knees and wiped away his tears as they flowed from his eyes, while he himself broke out in violent weeping. The sons of Jacob and their wives all sought to comfort their father. They arranged a great memorial service, and they wept and mourned over Joseph's death and over their father's sorrow. But Jacob refused to be comforted. The tidings of his son's death caused the loss of two other members of Jacob's family. Bilhah and Dinah could not survive their grief. Bilhah passed away the very day the report reached Jacob, and Dinah died soon after. And so he had 3 losses to mourn in 1 month. He received the tidings of Joseph's death in the 7th month, Tishri, and on the 10th day of the month, and therefore the children of Israel are bidden to weep and afflict their souls on this day. Furthermore, on this day the sin offering of atonement shall be a kid of the goats, because the sons of Jacob transgressed with a kid, in the blood of which they dipped Joseph's coat, and thus they brought sorrow on Jacob. When he had recovered somewhat from the stunning blow, Jacob rose up from the ground and addressed his sons, tears streaming down from his cheeks all the while. "Up," he said, "take your swords and your bows and go into the field, and make search. Perhaps you will find the body of my son, and bring it to me, so that I may bury it. Keep a lookout, too, for beasts of prey, and catch the first one you meet. Seize it and bring it to me. It may be that God will have pity on my sorrow, and put the beast in your hands that has torn my child in pieces, and I will take my revenge on it." The next morning the sons of Jacob set out to do the bidding of their father, while he remained at home and wept and lamented for Joseph. In the wilderness they found a wolf, which they caught and brought to Jacob alive, saying, "Here is the first wild beast we encountered, and we have brought it to you. But of your son's corpse we saw not a trace." Jacob seized the wolf, and amid loud weeping he addressed these words to him: "Why did you devour my son Joseph, without any fear of the God of the earth, and without taking any thought of the grief you would bring down on me? You devoured my son without reason. He was guilty of no manner of transgression, and you brought the responsibility of his death on me." To grant consolation to Jacob, God opened the mouth of the beast, and he spoke, "As the Lord lives, who created me, I have not seen your son, and I did not tear him in pieces. From a land far off I came seeking my own son, who suffered a fate like yours. He has disappeared, and I know not whether he is dead or alive, and therefore I came here 10 days ago to find him. Today, while I was searching for him, your sons met me, and they seized me, adding more grief to my grief over my lost son. Then they brought me to you. This is my story, and now, O Son of Man, I am in your hands. You can dispose of me as seems well in your sight, but I swear to you by the God that created me, I have not seen your son, nor have I torn him in pieces. Never has the flesh of man come into my mouth." Astonished at the speech of the wolf, Jacob let him go unhindered, but he mourned his son Joseph as before. It is a law of nature that however much one may grieve over the death of a dear one, at the end of a year consolation finds its way into the heart of the mourner. But the disappearance of a living man can never be wiped out of one's memory. Therefore, the fact that he was still inconsolable made Jacob suspect that Joseph was alive, and he did not give entire credence to the report of his sons. His vague suspicion was strengthened by something that happened to him. He went up into the mountains, hewed 12 stones out of the quarry, and wrote the names of his sons on them, and their constellations, and the months corresponding to the constellations, a stone for each son, thus Reuben, Ram, Nisan, and so forth for each of his 12 sons. Then he addressed the stones and told them to bow down before the one marked with Reuben's name, but they did not move. He gave the same order regarding the stone marked for Simon, and again the stone stood still. And so he did for all his sons until he reached the stone for Joseph. When he spoke concerning this one, "I command you to fall down before Joseph," they all prostrated themselves. He tried the same test with other things, with trees and sheaves, and always the result was the same. So Jacob could not but feel that his suspicion was true. Joseph was alive. There was a reason why God did not reveal the real fate of Joseph to Jacob. When his brothers sold Joseph, their fear that the reproof of their iniquity might reach the eyes of their father led them to pronounce the oath that none of them would betray the truth without the consent of all. Judah advanced the objection that an oath is invalid unless it is decreed in the presence of 10 persons, and there were but 9 of them. For Reuben and Benjamin were not there when the sale of Joseph was concluded. To evade the difficulty, the brothers counted God as the 10th person, and therefore God felt bound to refrain from revealing the true state of things to Jacob. He had regard, as it were, for the ban pronounced by the brothers of Joseph, and as God kept the truth a secret from Jacob, Isaac did not feel justified in acquainting him with his grandson's fate, which was well known to him, for he was a prophet. Whenever he was in the company of Jacob, he mourned with him, but as soon as he left him, he also stopped manifesting grief, because he knew that Joseph lived. Jacob was thus the only one among Joseph's closest kinsmen that remained in ignorance of his son's real fortunes, and he was the one that had the greatest reason of regretting his death. He spoke, "The covenant that God made with me regarding the 12 tribes is null and void now. I tried in vain to establish the 12 tribes, and see now the death of Joseph has destroyed the covenant. All the works of God were made to correspond with the number of the tribes. 12 are the signs of the zodiac, 12 the months, 12 hours has the day, 12 the night, and 12 stones are set in Aaron's breastplate. And now that Joseph has departed, the covenant of the tribes is for nothing." He could not replace the lost son by entering into a new marriage, for he had made the promise to his father-in-law to take none besides his daughters to wife, and this promise, as he interpreted it, held good after the death of Laban's daughters as well as when they were alive. Besides grief over his loss and regret at the breaking of the covenant of the tribes, Jacob had still another reason for mourning the death of Joseph. God had said to Jacob, "If none of your sons dies during your lifetime, you may look on it as a token that you will not be put in Gehenna after your death." Thinking Joseph to be dead, Jacob had his own fate to bewail also, for he now believed that he was doomed to Gehenna. His mourning lasted all of 22 years, corresponding to the number of years he had lived apart from his parents and had not fulfilled the duty of a son toward them. In his mourning, Jacob put on sackcloth, and so became a model for the kings and princes of Israel, for David, Ahab, Joram, and Mordecai did likewise when a great misfortune befell the nation. Judah and his sons. When the sons of Jacob saw how inconsolable their father was, they went to Judah and said to him, "This great misfortune is your fault." Judah replied, "It was I that asked you, 'What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood?' And now you say the sin is mine?" The brothers continued to argue, but it was you that said, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites," and we followed your advice. If you had said, "Let us bring him back to his father Jacob," we would have followed that advice as well. The brothers then deprived Judah of his dignity, for before that he had been their king, They also excluded him from their fellowship, and he had to seek his fortune alone. Through Judah's chief shepherd, Hira, he became acquainted with the Canaanite king of Adullam, Arson by name. Though he was well aware of the corruption of the generations of Canaan, he permitted passion to get the better of him and took a Canaanite to wife. The Adullamite king gave a banquet in his honor, at which his daughter Bathshua poured the wine, and intoxicated by wine and passion, Judah took her and married her. Judah's action may be compared to that of a lion who passes a dead animal and eats it, though a dog, preceding him on the way, had refused to touch it. Even Esau in time came to acknowledge that the daughters of Canaan were wicked. The Holy Spirit cried out against Judah when he married the Canaanite woman of Adullam, saying, "The glory of Israel fell to shame in Adullam." The firstborn son of Judah from this marriage was named the childless, a suitable name for him as he died without begetting any children. At Judah's desire, married Tamar, a daughter of Aram, the son of Shem. But because she was not a Canaanitish woman, Er's mother used artifices against her, and he did not know her. And an angel of the Lord killed him on the third day after his wedding. Then Judah gave Tamar to his second son, Onan. The marriage taking place before the week of the wedding festivities of had elapsed. A whole year Onan lived with Tamar without knowing her, and when, finally, Judah uttered threats against him on that account, he too, indeed, had intercourse with her, but, giving heed to the injunctions of his mother, he took care not to beget any children. He too died on account of his iniquity, and his name, Onan, mourning, was well chosen, for very soon was his father called on to mourn for him. Now Judah conceived the plan of marrying Tamar to his youngest son, Shelah, but his wife would not permit it. She hated Tamar because she was not of the daughters of Canaan like herself, and while Judah was away from home, Bathshua chose a wife for her son Shelah from the daughters of Canaan. Judah was very angry at Bathshua for what she had done, and also God poured out his wrath on her. And on account of her wickedness, she had to die, and her death happened a year after that of her two sons. Now that Bathshua was dead, Judah might have carried out his wish and married Tamar to his youngest son, but he waited for Shelah to grow up because he feared for his life, seeing that Tamar had brought death on two husbands before him. So she remained a widow in her father's house for 2 years. Endowed with the gift of prophecy, Tamar knew that she was appointed to be the ancestress of David and of the Messiah, and she determined to venture on an extreme measure in order to make sure of fulfilling her destiny. Accordingly, when the Holy Spirit revealed to her that Judah was going up to Timnah, she put off her garments of widowhood and sat in the gate of Abraham's tent, and there she encountered Judah. All the time she had lived in the house of her father-in-law, he had never seen her face, for in her virtue and chastity she had always kept it covered, and now, when Judah met her, he did not recognize her. It was as a reward for her modesty that God made her to become the mother of the royal line of David and the ancestress of Isaiah, and his father Amos as well, both of whom were prophets and of royal blood. Judah passed Tamar by without paying any attention to her, and she raised her eyes heavenward and said, "O Lord of the world, shall I go forth barren from the house of this pious man?" Then God sent the angel that is appointed over the passion of love, and he compelled Judah to turn back. With prophetic caution, Tamar demanded that as a pledge for the payment he promised her, a kid of the goats, he leave with her his signet, his mantle, and his staff, the symbols of royalty, judgeship, and messiahship, the three distinctions of the descendants of Tamar from her union with Judah. When Judah sent her the promised reward, a kid of the goats, by the hand of his friend, in order to receive back the pledges from her, Tamar could not be found, and he feared to make further search for her, lest he be put to shame. But Tamar, who soon discerned that she was with child, felt very happy and proud. for she knew that she would be the mother of kings and redeemers. When her pregnancy became known, she was forcibly dragged before the court, in which Isaac, Jacob, and Judah sat as judges. Judah, being the youngest of the judges, and therefore the least of them, was the first to give a decision. For so it is prescribed in criminal cases that the principal judges do not often overrule the lesser and influence their decisions unduly. It was the opinion of Judah that the woman was liable to the penalty of death by burning, for she was the daughter of the high priest Shem, and death by fire is the punishment ordained for a high priest's daughter that leads an unchaste life. The preparations for her execution were begun. In vain, Tamar searched for the 3 pledges she had received from Judah, but she could not find them, and almost lost hope that she would be able to wring a confession from her father-in-law. She raised her eyes to God and prayed, "I supplicate your grace, O God, you who give ear to the cry of the distressed in the hour of his need. Answer me, that I may be spared to bring forth the 3 holy children, who will be ready to suffer death by fire, for the sake of the glory of your name." God granted her petition and sent the angel Michael down to help her. He put the pledges in a place which Tamar could not fail to see them, and she took them and threw them before the feet of the judges with the words, "By the man who owns these, I am with child, but though I perish in the flames, I will not betray him. I hope in the Lord of the world, that he will turn the heart of this man, so that he will confess this thing." Then Judah rose up and said, "With your permission, my brothers, and you men of my father's house, I make it known that with what measure a man judges, it shall be judged to him, be it for good or evil. But happy the man that confesses his sins. Because I took the coat of Joseph and colored it with the blood of a kid, and then laid it at the feet of my father, saying, 'You know whether this be your son's coat or not,' so also must I now confess, who owns this signet, mantle, and staff. But it is better that I be put to shame in this world than I should be put to shame in the other world before the face of my pious father. It is better that I should perish in a fire that can be extinguished, rather than be cast into hellfire, which devours other fires. Now then, I acknowledge that Tamar is innocent. By me she is with child, not because she indulged in illicit passion, but because I held back her marriage with my son Shelah." Then a heavenly voice was heard to say, "You are both innocent. It was the will of God that it should happen." The open confession of Judah induced his older brother Reuben to make public acknowledgment of the sin he had committed against his father, for he had kept it a secret until then. Tamar gave birth to twin sons, Perez and Zerah, both resembling their father in bravery and piety. She called the first Perez mighty, because she said, "You showed yourself of great power, and it is proper that you should be strong, for you are destined to possess the kingdom." The second son was called Zerah, because he appeared out of the womb before his brother, but was forced back again to make way for Perez. These 2, Perez and Zerah, were sent out as spies by Joshua, and the line that Rahab bound in the window of her house as token to the army of the Israelites, she received from Zerah. It was the scarlet thread that the midwife had bound on his hand to mark him as the child that appeared first and withdrew. Next, the wives of the sons of Jacob. End part 25 of 95, thelegendsofthejews.com.